Government has imposed a ban on the production, importation and sale of foodstuffs containing any part of the cannabis plant, including hemp derivatives. This move has drawn criticism from industry experts who argue that it fails to distinguish between non-psychoactive hemp products and cannabis intended for recreational use. They say the blanket prohibition undermines the country's burgeoning cannabis industry and is contrary to global trends towards regulation and commercialization. For more on this, we're now joined by member of the Presidential Cannabis and Hemp Steering Committee, Advocate Gareth Prince, and he joins us now via our video link. Advocate, thank you so much for your time this evening here on SABC News. Firstly, maybe let's start off here and get your reaction when it comes to this government position to impose a ban on production of food items containing cannabis.
Good evening, my sister, and thanks so much for having me. It is rather unfortunate, but it didn't really come as any surprise that government came forth with this action, because unfortunately government's action in relation to cannabis has from the outset never been rational. And this particular action that goes about banning hemp products and anything and all products, edible specifically, that contains cannabis, seems to labor under the misunderstanding that people only smoke cannabis. Now, what the minister, whereas he has the right to make regulations, he doesn't have the right to make new laws further limiting the right to use, possess, and cultivate cannabis. Therefore, it is our view that the action of the minister is actually ultra vires, and that he exceeded his powers by making these regulations that places further limitation on the right of South African citizens to use cannabis. And that is on top of the fact that they have just passed a cannabis law that still failed to tell users of cannabis where they can legitimately source cannabis. And this fallacy that everybody only smokes cannabis is one that needs to be eradicated, because there are several people that doesn't want to smoke and they want to use cannabis in one of its many other forms that are available, and citizens should not be limited in their right in terms of how they want to use the plant, because smoking of it is but one of its thousands of usages, and the minister may not unduly limit this right, which he sought to do now in this ill-founded and unconstitutional regulation that he just enacted.
And Advocate, I mean, one would even ask for a bit of background in terms of how did we even get here to this point, because not so long ago we saw a number of these shops mustering them up in, you know, some of the shopping centres, and all of a sudden we now see this move from government. And how will this in turn also affect businesses who are already profiting from, you know, selling the cannabis products?
You know, we within the cannabis industry, we were very dissatisfied by the fact that government chose to differentiate between what they call medical cannabis, hemp, and then dacha. And we have seen that the naked preference that government have exhibited in favor of hemp and medicinal cannabis, whereas they have continued to treat dacha as a drug. Now, there's absolutely no basis in science for making these distinctions, and the narrative that seems to portray hemp and medicinal cannabis as safer versions as opposed to dacha or cannabis is just not founded in science, logic, or reason. And the sad reality is that for the past 6 years, government has done absolutely nothing to advance dacha, that which was the subject of the Constitutional Court order. And they have made unlawful provisions in respect of hemp as well as medical cannabis, favoring these two parts of the plant, but doing nothing to advance dacha, that particular plant which forms the basis of hundreds of thousands of indigenous farmers, and the crop that is actually acclimatized itself to South African conditions, and the one which should form the basis for our industrial approach towards cannabis commercialization. So this naked preference, which is very much the same as they did under apartheid, where they sought to favor certain groups of people with benefits, whereas other groups were visited with burden. And that is unfortunately what we are seeing in relation to dacha and hemp. So this arbitrary treatment on the part of the minister, which they just did now, is nothing new for us within the dacha industry, because that is simply the way in which government have treated us within this industry. And whereas other countries are commercializing and making billions in tax dollars and pounds, South Africa is lagging behind. And here we now see that government still wants to send people to prison instead of allowing citizens to commercialize, advance themselves with this remarkable, renewable and sustainable crop.
All right, Advocate, just to also get your insight there, something that you mentioned a bit earlier on, and those also making use of cannabis for medicinal reasons. Will this also then affect some South Africans who have opted to use it, for health purposes?
Indeed it would, because anybody that seeks to attempt to buy any cannabis product that is not raw cannabis would technically be breaking the law, and such a person would be subject to arrest and detention for seeking to exercise their rights. And South Africa is supposed to look to the experiences of other countries that have gone through the same exercise as ourselves in terms of our constitution. And when one looks to what Canada has done, you find that there was decisions by their Supreme Court saying that the government does not have the right to simply confine people's usage of cannabis to the usage of raw cannabis. And therefore, those people that seeks to use cannabis in any other way, for instance, by extracting the oil or using the oil, I'm going to add, to edibles, these people should be allowed to do that. And that the government cannot make regulations that would make it difficult for them to use cannabis in that particular form. Because smoking, as I've said earlier, is but one manner in which the plant can be used.
All right.
And government does not have the right to strictly limit our usage of cannabis to smoking it, because millions of people prefer not to use the plant in that particular way, and they should not be inhibited in their choice of doing so. And those people that have built businesses and that have received permits from government to, for instance, cultivate hemp, they should be allowed to do that, and they should not be inhibited unduly in that.
All right, Advocate, thank you so much there for your time. That is Advocate Gareth Prince. He is the Presidential Cannabis and Hemp Steering Committee, a member of that committee. They're giving us his insights in terms of the developments in which we saw from the health sector, giving us an insight in terms of the ban of cannabis and cannabis products.